I prepared to take my real estate exam, I figured some of you wanted to hear me do true official ASMR while you fall asleep. So I'm going to give you me reading Chapter 3, Environmental Issues. And upon completion of this chapter, you will be able to do the following. List 2 examples of materials where asbestos may be found. Provide the year up until lead-based paint was commonly used in residential buildings. Describe at least one way in which radon can enter into a house. Provide at least one scenario which may lead to mold growth in a house. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was created in 1970 during the Nixon administration to deal with emerging environmental problems caused by excessive pollution from industrialization, transportation methods, and unchecked hazardous chemical applications. The original goal was to stem the escalating negative impact of human health and the natural environment by creating an agency that encompasses federal research, environmental monitoring, standard rules and regulations, and enforcement under one umbrella. Congress hope to encourage and force, when necessary, individuals and businesses to take a more mindful approach to how we balance growth and progress with responsible stewardship. Some of the EPA laws set benchmarks to protect water resources, while others establish rules banning the use of certain chemical compounds for commercial use that could cause long-term or permanent damage to soil or irreversible health problems for humans and animals. Some of the laws on the books today restrict the type of building materials and what type of buildings or structures can be built in certain areas. Let's explore a few rules that directly impact real estate development and sales activities. First, we'll talk about the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or CERCLA, also known as the Superfund. CERCLA became law in 1980. Many of the EPA regulations seek to encourage the development and use of benign chemicals to control weed and insects, disinfection of our living spaces, and treat building materials to enhance strength and durability. The Act provides funding to remediate hazardous conditions. CERCLA established a fund to clean up uncontrolled hazardous waste sites identified by the EPA as priorities in need of immediate attention. Special taxes collected from the oil and gas industry funneled $1.6 billion into this fund in the first 6 years after ratification. While CERCLA's primary objective was to immediately remove any threat, the rules also included guidelines to minimize and prevent pollution threats and stabilize the environment by targeting sites with listed hazardous materials and any known contaminants, with the exception of oil and gas, which fall under other federal standards. Somebody said making chicken tortilla soup. The EPA standards attempt to reinforce personal accountability, and the agency has the authority to sanction responsible parties who fail to remediate contamination problems. There we go. Did you know that radon, a naturally occurring gas, is the second leading cause of cancer in our country? It appears in groundwater and air as a byproduct during the breakdown of uranium. Some building materials such as exotic granites, cement, basaltic rock, pumice, and gypsum waste also emit radon. The EPA updated their radon exposure prevention guidelines in 2013 to recommend everyone who purchases a home test for radon as soon as possible after occupancy. Additionally, the agency suggests people building new homes ask their contractor to utilize radon-resistant materials and sub-foundation construction techniques to mitigate radon transfer from the air, private wells, and surrounding soil. Let's talk about the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, SARA, of 1986. The EPA spent the first 6 years learning on the job, so to speak. SARA reinforced the initial objectives and made changes based on knowledge gained. For example, SARA strengthened the focus on human health problems associated with hazardous waste sites and encouraged the public to get involved with the decision-making process behind initiating best practice for cleaning up dirty sites. The act provided new enforcement authority while giving states more involvement in standards development. SARA also requires that all remedies and legislation cover existing state and federal environmental rules and laws. Perhaps the most significant change was an increase in funding that brought the total Superfund trust to $8.5 billion. As mentioned earlier, some EPA legislation overlaps with other regulations. As an example, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act provides protocol and rules for underground storage tanks containing petroleum-based products, non-hazardous waste, medical waste, and toxic waste. However, CERCLA provides guidelines for the types of controlled waste. Two legislative initiatives enjoy shared jurisdiction: the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the other environmental rules often intersect with independent EPA regulations, as well as both state and federal laws. Earlier, we mentioned radon gas, which is found in water sources and private wells in almost every region of the United States. Ideally,
all this whispering is making me yawn.
Ideally, all commercial residential property water supplies would be tested for radon before transferring ownership. This doesn't always happen though, so the EPA has numerous regulations enacted to protect public health and wellness. One example is the Safe Drinking Water Act, approved by Congress in 1974. A fort with sheets on a blanket. I might have to do that next time. Which established safety standards for public drinking water. The law has seen two amendments, one in 86 and one in 96. While SDWA rules cover water sources like lakes, rivers, springs, streams, and underground wells, the EPA does not monitor or otherwise regulate private or commercial wells that serve fewer than 25 people. The standards aim to control or eliminate or mitigate both man-made and naturally occurring contaminants. There is an ongoing partnership with the EPA, state regulators, and a variety of state water systems to ensure health-based standards are upheld across the United States. Recognizing the vast number of threats to safe drinking water for humans and animals, SWDA initially focused on monitoring to improve water quality at the tap or faucet. However, the 96 addressed threats from improper chemical disposal, pesticides, and waste injected underground with a broader approach. The modifications enhanced by existing law, creating an overarching policy to ensure safer water from the source to the tap. That meant new guidelines laid the foundation for limiting barriers to modernizing water systems, providing advanced operator training, access funding and opportunities, expanding public information campaigns, and implementing innovative source water treatments. This fundamental change made it more efficient to address environmental contaminants from animal waste, chemical disposal, underground substance storage leaks, human threats, and other potential and known hazards to clean water supply. Two other important EPA regulations are the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Some people confuse the SWA with the CWA, while the SDWA governs clean water from the original water source to a consumable beverage. CWA primarily regulates source water. Think bodies of water like the Great Lakes, rivers like the Mississippi, and reservoirs by man-made dams and levees. CWA covers ponds and navigable waters and sets standard for sewage treatment plants and surface waters. The Clean Water Act came about as a major restructuring of the 1948 Federal Water Pollution Act. Exhaustive amendments created a funding source for construction of sewage treatment plants established by EPA authority to implement a permit program for discharging any pollutant into navigable waters from a point source. Further amendments in '87 eliminated construction grants while establishing regulations that solidified federal regulations such as Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which empowered states to proactively manage water quality within their borders. Environmental protection laws and clean water regulations aim to protect humans, animals, and aquatic life with short and long-term solutions to prevent contamination from human irresponsible activity. Finally, the Clean Air Act in 1970. There were few regulations covering air pollutions, emissions from buildings, cars, trains, planes, and other stationary and mobile sources. The CAA gave the EPA the authority to establish nationwide standards to regulate hazardous air pollutions and direct sales to implement plans appropriately, mitigating air pollution by monitoring industrial activity, creating standards to reduce risk to public health and wellness. Amendments in 77 and 90 revised achievement goals because many states could not meet the rigorous requirements by the original 75 deadlines. Environmental protection regulations use air quality laws to govern residential wood-burning stoves, hydronic heaters, air force furnaces used primarily for heat. Some states enacted more stringent laws than the EPA. For example, in 2016, passed ordinances that prohibit new construction buildings from installing any wood-burning appliance, even one approved by the EPA, are air-friendly. Every state has unique environmental protection regulations. As a real estate professional, it is your job to make sure you know about local, state, and federal laws that regulate air and water quality. And you know you should take time to dig in the history of each building and piece of land you plan to list. A well-informed real estate agent becomes a proactive advocate for every client. All right, well, I'll see you later for the next part.